gentleman said, "Oh, thank you very much," walked away. A fellow student came rushing up. He says, "Do you realise who you've spoken to? Philip Larkin."
But as we got older, we realised that possibly we should have a reunion every year for obvious reasons. So basically it's our 80th birthday, so we decided to come back to Hull.
I have to say meeting my wife, wouldn't Okay, my name is Brian Gardner. Graduated from Hull in 1964. Geography the main subject, and I did ancillary botany for 1 year, because that was how the course was structured then. After leaving Hull, I went on to do postgrad education in Carnegie College in Leeds. That was in PE and teaching. And from there then moved on to teaching in London, Hertfordshire, and ended up teaching in Gloucestershire. So I did about 42 years in schools, which quite a long time ago, but I enjoyed that time and ended up as a head of a big school in the county. So geography, I taught geography for probably about 20 years, bits and pieces together with PE, and then gradually taught less and less and less. So that's so I'm here now, 80 years on, or 80 years on in my life.
Yeah, I'm Ryan Watling, and I also graduated in 1964. Geography, did physical geography, and my ancillary subject was geology. But having achieved my degree, I did not go into teaching, but decided to go into business, and I joined Sainsbury's graduate trainee program. And whilst there, I moved into the logistics department. I was there for 10 years, and then I moved to work for a company called Weller, which is a German company specialising in hair care at that time, and I remained with them looking after their logistics for 32 years.
My name is Brian Twiddle. I also graduated in 1964 in geography and stayed on in Hull for a further year to do a postgraduate diploma, postgraduate certificate in education, as it was then. I then moved to Scotland and started working in further education, teaching geography, and gradually moved into teacher education and ended my career in Strathclyde University as first of all course director of the postgraduate course, and then I moved into something called enterprise education, trying to get youngsters to be more entrepreneurial and to be more enterprising. I started the National Centre for Education for Work and Enterprise, which I ran within the university as a self-funded unit, and eventually became Scotland's Social Entrepreneur of the Year for the work that I did.
My name's Tom Hutchinson. As with the others, of course, I did geography, finished in 1964. Took historical geography as a specialist subject in the third year, having taken history in the first year as an ancillary subject. I joined the electricity supply industry in the northeast, where I'm from, and spent 30 odd years, mostly in training, though there was also personnel work. And I ran management, communication type training courses within the Northeast Electricity Board. After that, I spent 4 or 5 years part-time lecturing in a technical college, NVQs in management. I retired from that about 18 years ago, and since then I write local history books of Southwest Durham. So my last one, 20th or so, is to be launched this Saturday.
I'm Derek Fisher. I graduated in 1964 and then did a year in education. Then got a job down in Derby teaching, and there I stayed teaching geography until I retired in later years, I became a navigator for a coach driver, and currently I'm, apart from singing, I am a music librarian for a local church.
Great. So what brings you all back to campus today?
Well, we've started in the last, 18 or so years having reunions. Initially, probably once every 2 or 3 years. And quite often it was related to when our colleague Clive Foster, who lived in Australia, came over on holiday. But as we got older, we've realised that possibly we should have a reunion every year for obvious reasons. So basically it's our 80th birthday, so we decided to come back to Hull. Normally the reunions have taken place in various geographical locations in England, basically.
And how have you found campus? Like, how have you found it being back on campus? Has it brought back lots of memories?
Yeah, it's interesting to see the buildings that we knew are still here, and all the new stuff's been built around it. So you still get a feel. Yeah, I remember walking down there, walking through that. It's got a good feel still. It still looks quite a good campus, or it's probably overbuilt, I suppose, but it's still got a good feel about it.
Did you have any memories from your first day on campus? You know, like when you first arrived as new students, meeting each other, perhaps?
I don't remember them meeting each other, but certainly the thing that we remember, I suppose, was the fact that we went around all these stalls, everybody trying to get you to join. You must join this club and you must join that club. And I certainly remember joining C&D that day, as quite a number of us did in those days.
That's the other thing, it's quite a daunting thing for us, all over the country, obviously. There wasn't, I don't think, in those days students were looked after anywhere near as well as they were now. My memory is just having a letter from a lady whose house is up the road, saying she was going to be my landlady. So I arrived in Paragon Station with my trunk or case or whatever, not knowing where I was going, who I was going to meet. And then I think the day after was the Freshers' Day or something, so we all wandered into we're all in digs, so there wasn't a couple of us worked together at any one time. And we just wandered in and totally amused by the whole setup, really, because I don't know whether in those days Hull had the setup of interviews, but very few of us ever came to the university for interviews in those days. You just get on your A-level results. So it was totally strange in any place I came from.
Didn't know anyone at all.
Yes, I was on the reserve list, so till the A-levels came out in August, you were in limbo, and the results came out, and presumably they were better than a lot of people thought, and I was offered a place, and then you turned up here probably 5 or 6 weeks later, and all the men just about were in lodgings, and I was in Hessel. So certainly for the first year and a bit, you cycled in every day. A bike was essential.
In fact, I think most of the males in the department were in lodgings, but most of the girls were actually in
Cottingham.
The interesting thing is, for myself, I was restricted to 2 universities. That was Hull and Leicester, the only 2 at the time that would accept a student without a GCE O-level language.
That's correct.
And as I had failed on my 11 plus, eventually transferred from secondary school to a grammar school, I missed out on languages, so I was restricted just to 2 universities.
I think that was true of many of us. I was the same. I hadn't got one language because coming from a farming background with no experience whatsoever of anybody ever going to university, it never crossed my mind to go to university until I was in the 6th form. And it was only then when you saw that you were getting better marks than lots of people that were going, you thought, well, maybe I could. But I'd chosen to drop French because it didn't seem to be that important to me. And so like Graham, and probably all of us, the vast majority of us didn't have a modern language, which was why I think we can say we got quite good students coming, because we were, I think, fairly able students who didn't have a modern language, and the whole became like a kind of I won't say a dumping ground, but a magnet for those of us who had gone down that route.
I was going to say what attracted you to Hull, because obviously you hadn't visited Hull before you came, but then it turns out that actually it was a choice between Hull and one of the universities.
Yeah, it was that. In my case, it was also quite local because I come from East Yorkshire. But I would have preferred to have gone away from Hull, as was the case in most people in those days. You wanted to go as far away from home as you could get. But I didn't have that choice, and that's how it was.
What were your initial impressions of campus when you came as students?
I think really being welcomed and the friendliness of everybody and the support we had. I think support from each other more than anything else. Because as Brian was saying, it was probably the first time most of us had actually been away from home.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a question of being able to go back home the following weekend. We had to stay here from the beginning of the term to the end of the term, because obviously the cost of travel. We relied on hitchhiking.
Yeah. We were quite lucky as a group of us who got involved in the Geography Society, and we made quite good connections with the third year, as they were in that, and they decided that we should try and bond a little bit, and therefore we to set up a rugby league match against them.
Oh, we did, yes.
And that got us connected, and it's very strange that we connected very well with the third year in our first year, but we knew very little about the second year, or indeed any of the years below it. Somehow there was a special bond with our third year.
If someone had said to you back then that you'd be still meeting every year for reunions in 2023, what would you have thought?
I think we'd have thought 2023, when's that? You know,
Yeah.
sort of thing. You would never, I mean, we lived through the Cuban crisis, so we were quite happy that we got through to the next year, you know, sort of thing. I don't think any of us would ever have thought 10 years ahead at that time, but more than 50, 60 years ahead. You know.
Because like lots of people, we all lost touch with one another for
chunks of our lives, we were not in contact.
So it was sort of the chance happenings that we managed to get back together, and somebody knew someone else, and then that's when it built up. So I suppose initially we had about 10 or 12 of us meeting up, was it?
Yeah. Graham and I did quite a bit of research trying to get in touch with everyone, and we made contact with quite a number who didn't want to know, but there was equally quite a substantial number of people who we couldn't find. And sadly, of those who we could find, some of us are not with us anymore.
An anecdote from the library. I was studying a geography book, and this gentleman came on and said, "What do you think of this library?" I said, "Fine, as compared with the wooden hut I've had to put up with in Kent when I was living there." The gentleman said, "Oh, thank you very much," walked away. A fellow student came rushing up. He says, "Do you realise who you've spoken to? Philip Larkin."
I was hoping to be for the Larkin story. What sort of like presence did he have on campus?
I don't think he did, in a sense.
No.
I was aware as to who the librarian was. And in fact, my landlady's daughter, who was 3 years younger than me, eventually got a job in the library and worked with Philip Larkin. But as a sort of celebrity, it didn't really appear on the horizon way back in the 60s. Unless you were possibly an English student and studied some of his works in that particular course.
looking back, what would you say the University Hall meant or means to you as someone who studied here and graduated?
Well, in one respect, the place itself has a great affinity. Because people used to say you wouldn't go towards Hull unless you were going to Hull itself, because there was nothing beyond. But it was a very enjoyable time, and I always enjoyed coming back, of course.
I think it's more the people that you met and you're still connected to, really, rather than the place itself. I was always in this area, so it was slightly different for me. But I think looking back, the experience we had was partly dependent on the size of the place. I think it wasn't a big sort of impersonal university.
I think it was only about 880 students.
Yeah, and you even though you didn't really know all that many students, you knew to see them, and you saw faces, and you felt part of something rather than an anonymous person, shall we say.
But just think about some of the students now who they would take us around and say, well, sometimes you don't see those students from one week to the other, sort of thing. Well, we saw each other every day, and that was tremendously good at us bonding, getting friendship, and it had structure. And I think probably in 1960s, in schools, there was a better structure, and we were used to a structure and a framework of our lives. And this sort of coming into a very amorphous situation, I think would be quite confusing for us.
Well, I think so. I mean, as Thomas said, we went on every Sunday or every second or third Sunday. We went on a field trip which we organised ourselves through the Geography Society. And we went on field weeks as part of the course. We had lots of ways of being together, and therefore you couldn't help but know people. It was part of life, wasn't it?
I think there was one occasion with the Sunday trip that we had sufficient for 3 coaches. This was all organised by the Geography Society. It just shows the comradeship, I think, between the students. Whereas today, what I've heard is a lot are actually working remotely, and I don't think having the same sort of contact that we had the advantage of. That could be one of the reasons why we're having this reunion.
And the field trips, the Sunday ones, were social rather than well, it was knowledge-based because we went to places like Malham in the Dales and did walks, which is our bread and butter in a sense. But the social element was in York, usually on the Sunday night for a couple of hours. Yeah.
What were classes like and teachers?
Well, we generally were expected to attend lectures. I don't know whether we actually ticked it, whether we were there or not, but you're noticeable by your absence because there's so few of us.
Right.
And I think if we missed a few lectures, somebody would have asked a few questions.
We attended. I can think of only one course which I won't mention, but there was only one course where we used to send a representative to get the references rather than actually attend. But that was because it was a non-compulsory course which we didn't particularly enjoy, some of us anyway. But for the most part, I single that out just because it was so different from the others. But for the most part, we went to every lecture. You never thought of missing a lecture. That's what you did. Lecture on, you go to it.
How regular were lectures?
We didn't have lectures on Friday, but we would have more than one lecture every other day. More than one. Sometimes
about five a week.
And then we also had tutorials. where we met usually as a group of 3 students with one of the lecturers. And that continued right through.
How often did you spend in the library?
Well, the rest of the day. The other thing that we often talk about is that comparing what appears to be student life now to what our student life was, we seem to work from 9 o'clock in the morning till quite late in the evening, every day of the week. Which none of us had part-time jobs. We just didn't have time for part-time jobs because of the demands of the course. Whether that's for slow workers, I don't know, but that's how it was. We were very busy most of the time.
We spent all of our time in the library looking at reading journals and making notes on these journals. But you could sometimes use 50 different references in one course. You have to all these references, so we spent a lot of time in the library. That was where we lived all of us in the library. We also did a lot of map drawing, which we did in our huts, because that's where we had light tables and everything. So cartography was a big thing in our home. But otherwise, you worked in the library, and we used books as well.
Sounds
You had basically a textbook, you had a subject more or less.
There was
and all the papers, your research papers, there's usually 1 or 2 copies at the most in the library. So after a lecture, you had to run down to the library to see if you could be the first person to get one of these copies. So it was mad, really, compared to what the opportunity, the information that's around for students now on computers. It's just unbelievably different.
It sounds like from all the work you're doing, there wasn't much time to have fun and to go out and.
No. We did go out, but relatively rarely, and we didn't have the money
Saturday,
Saturdays, maybe a Friday. But we didn't have enough money also, to do very much else.
So what did you spend the evenings doing?
Working. Pretty much. Well, not every night. We would sometimes go down and have a beer at some point later on in the evening, but not by any means every day, not even close to that. Just occasionally we would do that. But working was what you did. Then there were exceptions to that, but the default position was that you were working.
And I was in lodgings 4 miles away. So when I cycled in, I would be here for the day in terms of what work, etc. And maybe go to the pub at lunchtime. But when I cycled back to Hessel for my evening meal, that was it. Might pop out of the pub in Hessel, of course. But it was quite a long day, but you couldn't come backwards and forwards easily and quickly. Or a lot of us couldn't anyway.
What was your experience of the city then? I mean, obviously your experience must have been quite different because you were based in Hessel and cycling, but the rest of you, were you more focused on campus, or did you go out to the city much?
Not a great deal.
No.
We used to go down to the cinema, in the Cecil, and then there was also a theatre, some groups performing. But of course, the union used to also have singers, groups that were popular at that time on a Saturday night, so sometimes there were dances here.
Do you have any memories of the union, any particular performers, or?
Well, there's one I remember, it was Ian Kane. He was here.
Was he?
You may not have heard of him. If you look him up,
Cliff Bennett and the Rebel Rousers? one minor hit, I think. I mean, Ian Kane had a number 1.
Yeah.
Do you want to give us a rendition? Or?
No.
I was reminding Brian of one of the things we used to do. It just shows you the way in which televised sport has changed. But on the first Tuesday in December, it was always the varsity match, the Oxford-Cambridge rugby match, and the rugby crowd, whether they were actual players or supporters, they used to congregate in there to watch this game. And nowadays that would be such a minor event in the sporting calendar, nobody would didn't notice it, but it was a big thing in those days. There were better players in those days because there were a lot of rugby internationals playing. But that was, that was something that as I say, was really very different from nowadays.
And those students who say they haven't got any money these days, any homeowners are really hard up. But if I remember correctly, I had a county award grant, and that was £300 for, I think, a term. The year. No, the term, I think.
It was paid per term.
That was in the year.
So it's £100 for 10 weeks, basically.
Yeah.
And out of that, I had to pay about, I think it was £4.15 for lodgings. And then what we had left, that was what we had. So, and I had to get textbooks as well. And Brian refers to hitchhiking. Well, we didn't have money really to catch the train or catch the coach or whatever. So it's and then students do now, of course, they work in the holidays. So that was our way of just boosting up a bit of extra pocket money. But we didn't have very much money at all.
Just to give you an example on hitchhiking, the field course that we had up in Inverness was when I was living with my parents in Canterbury. And I decided that I'd have to hitchhike to Inverness. Couldn't afford to go by train. Anyway, my father kindly dropped me off at a lay-by just outside of Canterbury at 9 o'clock in the morning on day one. I managed to get to Newcastle by 11 o'clock that night. I stayed in the station, I didn't sleep in the station, but I stayed in the station drinking coffee all night, got back out onto the A1 early the next morning, and I arrived in Inverness at 5 o'clock that afternoon. And that was just the norm. Hitchhiking was.
So that's what you did. If you wanted to get anywhere, you hitchhiked.
I mean, what was significant, two or three things in Hull between 61 and 64 was the significance in those days of the fishing industry. We lived in Hessel, Hull Road, Hessel, with a big family, and two of those worked in the fishing industry and another one on the railways. Now that was a very significant change, as you're probably well aware. The other thing was there was a big polio scare, and we had to queue up for our polio. The sugar.
Yeah. It was called salt vaccine. It was
the first mass vaccination.
First mass vaccination in Hull, and it was Beverley Road Baths we had to go down to. And they were in those days. I don't know if they're still there. And we all sugar log.
And the other significant thing was to do with the weather. I mean, 63 was a very bad winter. But funnily enough in Hull, I mean, it was freezing cold. It was bitter. There wasn't any snow. But having said that, when I turned the corner from Hessel Road into Pickering Road, cycling, I just saw this long road straight ahead. It was diabolical. But of course, at home, it can't be there. There was snow. So I only came across snow when I went home at Christmas. And then came back. It was bitter.
We had some of the very, very worst folks you could imagine. Brian and I were in the same digs, just along the road here, and we used to walk home every night. And that night when we walked home, we could not find the turn. We just could not see where the road was. We just could not see anything. We know that there's a huge number of deaths as a result of that. And of course, after that, we got the Clean Air Act, which is probably one of the most influential pieces of legislation ever passed. It was, you could not believe, if you didn't live through it, you couldn't believe the density of the fog. You couldn't see anything. You just could not see anything.
You did get home though.
We did get home. Yeah, we did get home.
So relatively speaking, the poor weather on campus today is actually compared to what you guys had to experience.
You wouldn't
we've accepted that as a norm.
Yes.
That's it.
Brian mentions that the very cold winter of 63 and Friday. The ground just froze. Bit of snow around, wasn't it? It was bitterly cold.
It was really difficult.
And I lived in Rowley Grove, just in my lane. And my bedroom was above the archway that went from the front of the terraces to the back of the terraces. So I had this wind howling out there. And the only reason by the Times or the Telegraph is to put on your bed to actually keep you well warm. And no sense of heating. No. It's in the digs and no chance of getting any heating at all.
I was in the next room, with a gathering situation. Every piece of clothing, our gowns, everything we put on top of the bed. You just, anything at all to try and just get through the night.
Yeah.
And you woke up with nests on the windows inside.
Inside, yeah. And so you came down to the university for the warm up as much as
Dickensian, isn't it?
Oh.
You mentioned sports. I was just wondering, did you have any experiences in sports teams while you were at the university?
I played hockey for the first 2 years. I captained the hockey team in my second year, I think it was. Then the third year I played rugby. And unfortunately, in the UAU match over in Leeds, I had a very bad knee injury, so I curtailed my rugby for the team. But I did go back later in the season and played hockey. Limped around the hockey field, let's say, rather than anything else. So I was we had a nice modern sick bay. I don't know if it's still there. I'm not sure. So I spent nearly all of the term, 10 weeks in the sick bay, which was quite good in a way because I managed to write my final thesis in peace and quiet at the sick bay. And then I used to haul over here on crutches for tutorials and go back.
I was taking lecture notes.
They used to bring me lecture notes, and it worked out well. But yeah, we had some good hockey teams, but again, we used to have matches on Wednesday afternoons and Saturdays. Was the usual pattern. I don't know whether that was the snow or not. Brian was a good cricketer, we all played cricket, but we never entertained our heads to play cricket in the summer term because of finals.
Too much work to be done.
Yeah.
I think we'll just finish with just one question, and you feel free to interpret this as you want, but I guess my last question is, what's your fondest memory of Hull?
I'll have to say meeting my wife.
I mean, actually, my wife was in the same department. Unfortunately, she isn't here today, but we were both geographers. She's from Sussex and I'm from County Durham. So, yes, I suppose.
You'll have to say this.
I think mine really was the friendship. The sort of colleagues that we had were always close and always supportive.
Yeah, I think our friendships were important, and it really goes into two phases. There was that immediate post-university period when we did all sorts of things, we all got married and we went to each other's weddings and all that kind of thing. So there was a few years of sort of continuing the ambience of being together, and then, as Brian said earlier, it then lapsed as we all developing our own lives and so on. And then it made quite a bit of meaning for our last 15, 20 years where we started to get back together again. So I suppose the fondest memory has got to be the people that I met.
And it always felt a good place to be in the city. If you ever went in the city, it always felt very safe, relaxed place to be. And nothing, by and large, students were well accepted then by the local people as well. Certainly by there seemed to be a lot of widow landladies and things around. It's very important to them, obviously. Or lodgings. So yeah, it's a good, safe place to be. Happy place.
third one who married a fellow student.
And that trumps meeting Philip Larkin in the library. Thank you very much for your time. That's really interesting insight into life at the university in the 60s. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.